Hey everybody, this is Jeff Johnson, the State Director of AARP Florida, and we're here tonight to talk about what we've learned or haven't learned from Hurricane Irma. And look, I know it seems like it's been a long time since that hurricane came through, and if you've got your power back and most of the debris out of your yard, you've probably moved on because Hurricane Maria came through and has sent more than 100,000 evacuees from Puerto Rico into Florida. We've had 2 mass shootings. We've had the opioid crisis. We've had scandals in Tallahassee. The 2018 election really started up. And so the media hasn't paid a lot of attention lately to what happened in the hurricane. But maybe you remember that 14 people died in a nursing home in Hollywood Hills because they didn't have air conditioning because Irma knocked it out. And you may remember that there was a lot of action, a lot of discussion about how we keep that from happening in other places because it wasn't just Hollywood. There were dozens of other nursing homes that were affected that fortunately didn't suffer fatalities but could have. There were assisted living facilities without power. There were senior apartment communities without power where people couldn't access the elevators or didn't have air conditioning or couldn't get food. And all of that comes together to say we need to figure out what we can do to protect the most frail and vulnerable Floridians that are out there in the path of a storm. And I'm joined here today by a couple of people. Monica Stanchula is a member of our AARP Florida Executive Council, and she's the CEO of Reunion Care, and she just finished hosting a caregiver conference right here in Tampa. And I guess, Monica, my question for you is, if you're not somebody who has a loved one in a nursing home, why should you care? What else should we be worried about?
Well, we have 2.6 million family caregivers here in the state of Florida, and those family caregivers are not only doing their own evacuation, but now they have to worry about the evacuation plans for their loved one that they're caring for. So whether they're living with them directly or they're living somewhere else, maybe in a senior living, an apartment or something, you need plans for both your family and for them to be able to evacuate safely. And my concern is with so much going on, with worrying about your pets, worrying about your seniors, worrying about everything, that we're not really prepared when these storms come the way they did with Irma that impacted our entire state. And so we have a lot of family caregivers that maybe are breathing a sigh of relief that things did go okay. But I think there's other people that realize we must do better, that we didn't do a good job this time around.
Great. You're absolutely right, Monica. And I'll say, by the way, if you're watching this on Facebook and you have a question to ask, you can put it in the comment section below the video, and we'll get to it. I also want to say that as we try to do more in Florida to help people age in place, to live in their homes as long as possible, then we need to not only be concerned about those congregate places, those big high-rises or those assisted living facilities, we need to figure out how we keep up with people who are just doing okay at home right now, but if they're without power for a week and a half, then things could go really bad, and we don't have a system to take care of that. I'm also joined by Doreen Barker. Doreen is Associate State Director for Advocacy, and she is one of our folks in Tallahassee who's keeping an eye on what's going on in Florida government. And clearly, there is a role for government in making sure that nursing homes, ALFs, and all the rest of us are taken care of and kept safe in a storm and in the immediate recovery. So, Doreen, can you fill us in a little bit about what's gone on so far in the wake of this?
Yes, Jeff, thanks. I'm betting that most of our friends out there that are watching are familiar with the governor's emergency power rule that he issued almost immediately, just days after the Hollywood Hills tragedy. But they may not be aware of the exact details of the rule. That rule that the governor issued requires that within 45 days of the effective date, that nursing homes provide in writing to ACA and assisted living facilities provide in writing to the Department of Elder Affairs and local EM agencies a detailed plan for review and approval that meets the following criteria: the acquisition of a generator, sufficient to ensure temperatures of 80 degrees or less for a period of 96 hours in the event of loss of power, and sufficient fuel to accomplish the same thing, acquisition of services to install, service, and maintain equipment. And then nursing homes have 60 days from the effective date, which was September 16th, to implement the plan under this rule. And if there's not compliance, there can be fines up to $1,000 a day, or they can ultimately have their license revoked. The industry came back immediately after the governor's emergency rule was issued, and held a summit and talked about the reasons why they couldn't comply. There were all kinds of issues, zoning requirements and landlocked issues of some assisted living facilities and nursing homes. So the governor issued a variance to the emergency power rule, and that variance still requires them to provide a plan of why they can't comply and tell in the petition, tell the departments what they're doing to comply. But to date, 638 of the 638 nursing homes, 606 of them have filed a petition for a variance, and 23 we saw today have not filed any kind of variance, so they're out of compliance. We're very worried about this. We'd like to see a lot of things accomplished, and one of them is to see the Division of Emergency Management conduct a review, that they should get together and talk about the things that worked well during Irma and the things that didn't, and see what they can do to improve those processes and procedures. As you mentioned before, government has been involved. We know that the governor has issued this emergency rule, and we know that the Speaker of the House has put together a select committee on hurricane preparedness. Legislators are very involved in the process. To date, there have been about a dozen bills filed. Some of them deal specifically with emergency power generators. Some relate to public utility power restoration, and others just relate to strategic fuel reserves. But there's more information online for those of you who are tuning in. It's www.aarp.org/FL if you'd like more details about that. And just to reiterate, AARP's position is and continues to be that we support requiring a backup generator to keep residents safe, so keep temperatures at 80 degrees or less. We support power restoration priority so that nursing homes are on the same level as hospitals, and we want to see inspection of facilities as soon as they are physically accessible. And we'd like to see more accountability. And again, if you'd like more information, go to www.aarp.org/FL.
Great. Thanks, Doreen. So again, this action was for nursing homes and ALFs to have adequate power and adequate air conditioning to cover the first couple of days of recovery, first 3-4 days of recovery. And to date, none of them virtually have complied. 638 homes out there, 600 and some have asked for a waiver. 23 haven't even filed a plan for a plan yet. And the legislature is meeting now, but they don't actually come into full session until January. So there's no law that gets passed until then. I know the agencies are working on a permanent rule, but again, at this point, these homes are supposed to tell their residents that, look, we can't cover you and we've put in a variance yet. And I would say that if you're watching this and you know anybody who is in a Florida nursing home, you should check and see whether they've been told that their nursing home doesn't comply. Now, I know there are nursing homes out there that do comply, but from the numbers of variances that have been filed, virtually all of them have said, no, we can't comply, we're not going to comply right away. That's just about nursing homes. That's just about their power needs. In addition, we think that the utility companies, and you mentioned this, need to prioritize nursing homes for restoration the same way they do hospitals. And there are bills going through the process right now to try to make sure that happens too. Now, that's just for nursing homes and assisted living facilities. When it comes to apartment complexes, there was a bill back after we had all the storms in 2004 and 2005 that required the high-rise apartment complexes to at least have a generator to run their elevator so people could get out. That bill got repealed, and so that's not in play right now either. We think that's something that's important. You mentioned that the regulators should be checking on these homes, as they did after people died in the Hollywood nursing home. We need to make that standard operating procedure rather than waiting for something bad to happen before regulators get out and check on the homes. And then we also need to figure out what we do about individuals who may have health needs, who may need power, and who may not know that the power companies are supposed to keep a prioritization list list that helps them recognize who's out there that needs to be checked on. And I've talked to the power company folks, and they say this is not like a fast pass at Disney. It does not get your power restored any quicker, but it at least lets them know that you're somebody that needs to be checked on. Most people don't know about it. The Area Agency on Aging doesn't have that as part of their process to try to help people. So there's a lot going on. There are a lot of problems to fix. None of them have been fixed yet, and we're concerned that the attention may be dwindling. I know people have asked questions in the Facebook comment section, and I know that Monica's going to ask them in a minute. Before she does, let me mention that I think it's in the caption of the video. There's a website, aarp.org/FL Safe in the Storm. FL Safe in the Storm. Hopefully it's just in the comment section and you can click on it when this is over. That'll take you to the petition that we have for legislators who, as Doreen mentioned, are meeting in committee right now so that they understand that these issues are important to you and they need to be important to them too. All right, so let's see. Do we have any questions?
We do. Has ACA audited the emergency management plans for all the ALFs and nursing homes in Florida?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know what's been audited to date.
So what we do know is that today ACA said there were almost 24 homes that haven't filed any plans. What we don't know yet is if they've had a chance to review any of those plans to see whether they're adequate. That's a good question. It's one that we can follow up with ACA on.
Absolutely.
Terrific. Is ACA requiring that these institutions have an evacuation plan for their emergency management plans for extended losses of power? Must they have it?
I believe everybody has to have an evacuation plan. Under the rules, they're required to have them.
So the question, so if they filed an emergency plan, it should have that in there. Because we don't know yet whether ACA has audited those plans. We don't know yet how many of the nursing homes have that in there. And we don't know if there's a long-term issue of power loss,
right,
if that's included as a need for evacuation. Because certainly there are homes that had to evacuate because they're in evacuation zones or in floodplains, and you have to evacuate from potential storm surge. But this is a whole different level of evacuation. So that's another great idea of things to check in on.
Okay, the next question is, I'm not sure why every nursing home is not required to have a generator similar to hospitals.
Very good question. And isn't that what the emergency order seeks to do?
It does.
And right now, so there is some discussion in the courts about whether the governor can actually enforce this emergency order, right?
Yes, and right now the governor is appealing the last ruling that actually put a stay on the process.
And at the same time, the agencies, the state agencies that regulate these homes are working on permanent rules so that even if the emergency rule goes by the wayside, and again, right now it doesn't look like most of the homes are able to meet the standards of the emergency rule, the permanent rule hopefully will address that, right?
Yes, the Department of Elder Affairs held a workshop last week relating specifically to assisted living facilities and took testimony regarding those rules. So they should be promulgated soon, and we will hopefully have an opportunity to comment.
And we'll make sure once we know what those rules are that we share them on the AARP Florida Facebook page, and certainly we'll send them out to the folks who have signed the petition, which you can do at aarp.org/FL Safe in the Storm, which again I'm really hoping is the link at the in the caption to the video. And we'll share with the Department of Elder Affairs, with the Agency for Healthcare Administration, how many people have signed those petitions. Even though they are agencies, they're not elected officials, they still need to know whether this is an important issue. What else do we have?
We also have, are nursing homes required to tell you if they have a generator or not?
Well, as of now, no. But according to the variants, they are required to tell you if they are not able to satisfy the governor's emergency rule. So the variance does require it.
And let me say this too, and this is where Doreen finds out she's going to end up with a lot of work. If you're watching this and you know somebody who's in a nursing home, have them ask whether they are complying with the rule, whether they have the generator, whether they have everything under control. And then let us know. And the easiest way to let us know is to email flaarp@aarp.org. Although I think if you can find your way back to this video and you post it in the comments afterwards, we can get it back that way too. Doreen has the list of the 600 and some nursing homes that have all filed variances saying we can't meet this order. So if you find a home that is saying we're fine and they're on our list, then we need to explore that, because that sounds like they may not be fully forthcoming.
So one of our viewers agrees with the position we're taking here. Power restoration to nursing homes and assisted living facilities should have the same priority as power restoration to hospitals.
I agree. And so one of the things that I think that Irma really brought out for a lot of people in Florida who don't live this every day is that nursing homes are not just like retirement homes in the past. There's an assumption that every place where you put a lot of older people together is the same. And the reality is nursing homes are for a very fragile population by and large. These are folks who probably in the past would have been an extended hospital stay, but because hospitals aren't able to keep them for long periods of time, nursing homes tend to be where they are. Fair?
Absolutely.
Do we have any others on there? And so if you're posting the questions, great, fantastic. We've got staff here in the office who are scribing as neatly and quickly as they can. Again, the aarp.org/flsafe in the storm is on the screen, I'm being assured. So you can click on that and sign the petition, which we really hope you do. So what are the other issues that we're hearing about?
Well, I understand that the industry has come out and indicated that they simply can't meet the rule. They can't satisfy it. And most importantly, they can't satisfy the time frames. They say if they've given enough time, maybe to next hurricane season, they can go ahead and comply. So that's an issue.
And I think, and there's a lot of discussion that this costs money. These are big generators. There's a lot of fuel involved, and I get that. But there are also homes in Florida that I know have done that, and they did it a while ago, and they didn't ask the state for additional money to do it. So I recognize that there is a need to figure out how to make this happen quickly, and I also know that there have been a lot of complaints about getting zoning changes or making sure that you get the permits pulled and all of those things that bedevil anybody who tries to do anything to their home or their business. Right. But the reality is this is important and their lives at stake, and so there should be ways for us to get through this and figure it out.
But my concern is for those families that are long-distance caregivers, so they have someone in a nursing home here in Florida, and they may not be in the state. They're not aware of what's going on the ground, and maybe it requires a call to that nursing home to talk about what the status of that generator is and what they're doing, and please give us a detailed evacuation plan, because we know it did happen in some facilities. We've heard some really good plans. We heard how telehealth worked to help to bridge those gaps as they were moved, they were evacuated to another site. So there are ways that this can be done and be done successfully, and I would just encourage every family caregiver to make sure that they know what the procedure is at the facility where their loved one is.
That's a good point. And I want to make sure that we're clear. There are great nursing homes in Florida.
Yes, there are.
And they have provided good care, and they have prepared in advance. And we need to make sure that all of them reach that level. And that's really what this discussion is about there.
And they really did do an excellent job of evacuating and moving the residents to safety. We received a question about our attending the workshop that I referenced, and the person is asking whether or not we submitted written comments, and we did. We submitted testimony comments to them, I believe it was Thursday of last week.
And you've been at everything that the public is allowed to get to that is dealing with this issue. And there is a special committee in the House, not the Senate, right? Just the House, that is focused on broadly how we learn from the storm, which is good, and there should be. And in addition, one of Doreen's colleagues, Zane, Zane Smith, who has done Facebook Live videos before, is dogging the utilities issue and working with the Public Service Commission to make sure that the utility companies are learning what lessons they can from what happened as well. So we're following this process as closely as we can. We want to use this as a mechanism to try to get the word out to you. Again, we hope you'll help us by taking action, by going to the website on the screen and signing the petition so that you can add your voice to this conversation. I did want to point out one other thing. Obviously, Facebook, relatively new tool for us here at AARP. You may have relatives who don't do Facebook very much, and you want to make sure that they get information too. The current issue of the AARP Bulletin, which is hitting your mailboxes probably in the next couple of days if you didn't just get it, is about how safe are our nursing homes. They don't have our bright smiling faces, and they're not real time, but they do have a lot of good information, very well written stories, and some good questions that you can ask. I also wanted to flag one other group that kind of gets lost in this. If you are concerned about somebody in a nursing home, one option, one vehicle you can use to try to check on them is the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. Now, that's a volunteer program across the state, and it's in other states too, where volunteers serve as kind of a liaison to the nursing home. They can go in at any time. They can check and make sure that people are being cared for. One of the things that we hope is that coming out of this process, we'll figure out ways not only for the agency regulators to check on homes after a storm, but to the extent that the ombudsman can, that they get out there and do it too. Did you have other questions?
I do. How can we tell the caregiving community to ask nursing homes to be vigilant?
I mean, I think the easiest things you can do. So first of all, joining your voice to ours by signing the petition makes sense. I think that going through the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program, which, by the way, usually they could use more volunteers if you're interested in doing that, is another way to try to do that. And then I think particularly if you're a caregiver of somebody who's in a family, you have a role to play in talking to the administration of that home and making sure they understand what your concerns are, right?
Absolutely, I agree with you. And you need to sit down with them at the time of admission and make sure that you know what their emergency plan is. This isn't something we wait until the week before the emergency. Please ask at the time of admission, be informed, and stay informed. Stay in communication with whatever facility your loved one is in.
And I want to open one other front on this too, because we've been talking about nursing homes because that's where the deaths happen. That's where the most fragile population is. And we talked briefly about high rises and other places where you have a lot of older Floridians living under the same roof. But I also think that we need to figure out, how do we help the individual who's just a neighbor in a community of folks of all ages to make sure that they don't get lost in the storm either. Because if somebody in an apartment or somebody in a assisted living facility goes without power for a week or 10 days, it'll affect their health in some pretty significant ways. But the same is true if you're stuck at home. And you may be fine right now, you may be able to get out and about okay, you may be able to manage, but if you don't have power for a long period of time, if you don't have air conditioning, if you don't have fresh food, all of those things, then even if you're just a neighbor down the street, you could be at risk too. We need to figure out as a state how we address that. I don't know if you have any ideas.
I don't, but I agree with you. We have to have some kind of plan, some almost reverse 911 where you could be checking in, like Facebook does when there's an emergency. Check in on Facebook and say, I'm okay, but we need some way. You're absolutely right. So neighbors checking on neighbors, communities are looking after their own. That simple call when an emergency is happening can be invaluable to someone who's suffering.
You know, Monica, we talked about plugging the Long-Term Care Ombudsman as a volunteer program, but the reality is being engaged in your neighborhood matters too. If you're somebody who lives in a neighborhood where you know there are some older people, frankly, if you know there are younger people, it's good to be checking on each other anyway. And hopefully one of the things that we learned from the storm, we saw it happen in Harvey right before, and we saw it in Irma, where neighbors came together and helped each other out. And that's not a government program, and that's not a policy that you change. It's an ethos that we as a state need to do more to develop.
It's really important to check in on those elderly folks because they are more susceptible to heat and the effects of heat, not only because of their age, but because the chronic diseases that they often have and because of the medications that they take.
Good point. That's a really good point. So I know that we've had a bunch of questions. I appreciate all of you who are on this. Again, we're going to be checking back in over time with updates as we get them. It's really important during this committee time. And again, so there are a lot of people who don't follow the legislature particularly closely. Right now, the legislature meets in committees. So not the full session, not banging the gavel, not passing any laws. But they are having the precursors to that, where they raise the ideas that become bills, and they're moving bills through different committees. And legislative session, the start time changes, it seems like every year. When does it start this
January
year?
this
So
year.
January. So right after the first of the year is when they'll start passing bills into law. Governor could have held a special session, but I think that the process is going to work this way because of the emergency order. We'll let you know, and you may be able to see in the news whether the emergency orders will get held up, whether anybody follows through, and we're going to do our best to tell you too. I will say this too, one last thing, and then we've got one more question for Monica. In addition to signing our petition, in addition to contacting the nursing homes that you know, write a letter to the editor. Because right after the storm, there were a lot of stories. The Miami Herald did a great job. The Sun Sentinel did a great job. The papers that they're connected with did a great job of covering it. Right now, there's an online news source called Politico that seems to be paying some attention to this issue. There are a couple of good writers who are working on it in Tallahassee. But the reality is most of the state has moved on. They're talking about the evacuees from Puerto Rico and Maria. They're talking about the national news, all the different national news. They're talking about the elections that happened last night and the who's running for governor in 2018. They're talking about lots of other stuff. And the reality is, if they lose focus on this issue, then we'll all lose the momentum that we had right after the storm to try to get this fixed for next time, because hurricanes are coming back next year. I virtually guarantee it. We have to be ready for it. One last question.
Jeff and Doreen, who can the public contact at the legislature to voice their opinion?
Contact your local legislator. You can go to Online Sunshine and put in your zip code and find out who represents you. Contact them.
And I'll say absolutely, Doreen, a couple of things to layer onto that. When you sign the petition, that'll help us. It'll give us a message we can take to legislators. But it also would help out a lot if you wanted to help be a volunteer advocate. If you wanted to be somebody who would call an 800 number. And as we get closer to legislative session, as these issues start to move through the legislature, I suspect we'll set up a toll-free number that'll help you get connected to your legislator right away, as we do on the many federal issues that we've been talking about so far in 2017. If you go to aarp.org/FL Safe in the Storm, which again is linked at the bottom of this video, you can sign up and we'll follow up with you and let you know who you can contact, who's the appropriate committee. But as Doreen said, you can Google your legislator. You can go to Online Sunshine and find out who they are. They are in Tallahassee some of the time at this point in the year, but they're also home a fair amount at this time of the year, and they are accessible. This is not like members of Congress who have such a broad swath of the state that you hardly ever see them. Right. State legislators are in your community, and they need to know if this is an important issue to you as a constituent, as a member of that community. I think that's all the time we have. We'll do this again soon, and I appreciate you for watching and look forward to seeing your comments. Thanks.